All right, and we are live. How are we getting on, folks? Hope you're all doing well. On my end, a Saturday evening. I believe it's the afternoon for our comrade Lucha here. How are you getting on, Lucha? Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and say hello?
Yeah, how's it going, comrades? My name's Lucha. I I make art and agitprop pieces, I guess. Um, I consider myself a student of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. Um, I'm based in the United States in the occupied New African Nation and on occupied um, Choctaw land. Um, and I'm excited to be talking with you, delightful people, and with my friend Paul.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited about this. I think this is going to be a really fun and interesting conversation. We'll get a lot out of it. I'm really excited to have you on. I'm a big fan of your work. I think it's absolutely amazing. I have noticed some artwork that looks suspiciously Lucha-esque appearing all over the country, all over Ireland. There are little stickers going up which have a certain style to them. And it's amazing to see them all over the place. It's absolutely fantastic. I love the artwork that you make. There's links below to anyone who doesn't know and who doesn't follow yet. Please follow Lucha on Instagram, on Twitter, and I also believe that you've set up a YouTube channel recently, and you did an interview with Comrade Joma, if I'm not mistaken.
Right? Yeah. A few months ago, me and Joma, as part of my as part of the study group that I participate in, we talked about lots of topics. Protector People's War was kind of the main one. His views on that.
Mm.
Um, his views on the progress that the revolution in the Philippines is making, his history as an activist, stuff like that. And it was really interesting to get to talk to him. It was a huge honor, um, even though we do disagree on some specific things. There's no
Mm.
doubt that he's a very influential figure and very principled comrade, nonetheless. And it was still great to have the opportunity to talk to him because it's interesting because he's one of the like the quote unquote old revolutionaries
Mm.
of that era. Like there's Kapikaya in Turkey and him and Charu Majumdar in India. He's part of that sort of
The
old
old
school
guard, yeah.
group of, yeah, the OG revolutionaries that we can still have an opportunity to talk to, which is really interesting. And it's a good opportunity if you're trying to sort of find out how you fit into the movement. So
Yeah, absolutely, and he's also very approachable as well. I've seen he's done interviews with a few different people and a few comrades, and even if you disagree with this or that, and I think you and I would probably both be pretty much aligned, and more so on the what we call like the left line of the MLM movement internationally. But it is definitely useful to have these conversations and to engage with the work. And I mean, there's just a vast depth of knowledge there to be tapped into. There's so much to be learned there, and I definitely encourage comrades to go and check out that interview. I think you'll find a link. It should be linked in the description box below this. And do make sure to follow Comrade Lucha on Instagram, on Twitter, and so on for some amazing art. You can see, for the people who are watching now on the screen, if you're not just listening and if you're actually watching this, you can see there's a slideshow of some of Lucha's art on the screen at the moment. Hopefully you'll enjoy that. Lucha's also made really incredible art in support of the Irish movement over here, the Revolutionary Socialist Republican movement, has done some amazing work to that regard. And so I just, on behalf of the Irish Revolutionary Socialist Republican movement, I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you do. It's inspiring, and it's incredibly helpful, as we can actually see your work is appearing all over the country and inspiring people to get involved and to get in touch and to connect up with that movement. So the things that you're doing here are actually having a real tangible material impact in the world. And so I can't express how deeply grateful I am for the work that you do. So thanks very much for doing that. And everybody, please give as much support as you possibly can to Lucha and his fantastic work.
yeah, thank you, comrade. Well, and I also want to say thank you to the brave Irish these Republican revolutionaries who inspire me to make art like this in support of their struggle. I do want to give a shout out to Anti-Imperialist Action Ireland, one of the orgs that you're involved with and that I've provided art for in the past. They do some amazing work. They're actually out there in the struggle to fight for national liberation and socialism, to fight for a free, united, um, 32 county Irish Republic, which is something I think we can all um, lend our support to
Hell
in
yeah.
these times. Not just, of course, not just the national liberation struggle in Ireland, but everywhere. I want to give a shout out to all those activists and those revolutionaries. Um, if it's okay, I do want to give a quick shout
Yeah,
out to
of course.
some comrades in the Philippines who I believe it was 2 months ago who were two comrades, uh, comrade Chad Book and comrade Kevin Facio. These are two comrades in the Philippines who were martyred during the struggle. They were uh, I don't know if I can say this word on stream, but let's just try. They were killed by
Mm.
the Filipino fascist government during the struggle. They were illegally um, shot down. These were two young activists. They were teachers in their community, and they were both part of the LGBTQ community. They were deeply engaged in the struggle, and I just want to, kind of take a moment to thank them for their sacrifice to the struggle. So,
Yeah, they'll
yeah,
live forever. They'll live forever through all of us
they will.
in the movement. Rest in peace to the comrades, and my sincere condolences to all of the comrades in the Philippines who are dealing with this tragic, um, just another horrific fascist offensive from the old state in the Philippines, which is crumbling by the day. We all know that the Filipino movement is
Yes,
getting
of course.
stronger. It's getting stronger and stronger. It's going from strength to strength. It appears to be progressing into the later and advanced stages of the strategic defensive. So we're seeing some serious movement. We've been seeing incredible progress, particularly since 2016. The fall of the old state is inevitable, and all love solidarity to the comrades in the Philippines who are fighting for the new democratic revolution.
Of course, it's very, very exciting to see. Um, they, I saw something the other day where they were, it was a directive from the Central Committee where they were going to begin doing armed strikes in the cities, which is
Mm,
a huge step forward
yeah,
in the progression from the strategic stalemate stage, from the strategic defensive stage to the strategic equilibrium stage, which is very exciting to see. It's very inspiring to
yeah,
comrades all around the world to see that happening in our generation. It really kind of gives like a tangible feel of um, the possibility of seeing or I should say, the inevitability of seeing a socialist Republic of the Philippines.
absolutely. As you said, and as you said, inevitable. This is inevitable. This is going to happen. They're making very, very clear progress. As you said, they're strengthening the urban units after having focused a lot more on the rural and countryside areas for quite some time. They're moving back into the cities and they're advancing their people's war. And of course, we're limited to what we can say on this, but yeah, all love and solidarity to the
Yes,
revolutionaries who are putting their lives on the line and who've had to, unfortunately, who've lost their comrades in recent months, recent years. It's been 53 years, more than 53 years of struggle for them, but they'll keep going until socialism is achieved, until new democracy achieved, and then of course feeding into socialism and eventually communism. I've got all faith in them. Totally a revolutionary optimist in this regard, and yeah, all power to the Filipino revolution. Yeah, no, I'll just do a quick shout out to some of the comrades in the chat there who I see. It's great to see so many people. I can see that the Deprogram podcast is on live at the moment as well. Now, I think I may have accidentally, I didn't realize that was happening at the same time as this. So I'm afraid,
oh no.
yeah, I'm afraid probably most of the people who will be watching these streams normally are probably checking out Hakeem and Second Thought and Hugo over there. And I'm sure they're probably having a great time. They're great lads. But yeah, just to acknowledge that. Thanks, Marxism, Arism in the chat for acknowledging that. Say hello to the comrades in
Now
the
we're gonna
chat.
have a rivalry on our hands.
Yeah, there will be blood. I'll do a quick shout out to the comrades in the chat there who I can see anyway. So who have we got there? We've got Nara Streets, Jet Thompson, Davidson, Rug05, ASG, Wisconsin Comrade, Constant Blaze, Lazio X, ASG, Renjo, well, Cynthia the Farmer, Donald, how are you getting on? Good to see you. Hope you're keeping well. Levi, Bug, so good so far. Comrade Flamer, David is here. It's great to have you here. Hope you're all enjoying the evening. It's going to be a nice informal chat this evening, getting more people involved in the conversation. So it's not just me talking at you the whole time, but we're getting more and more people in. And I also want to encourage people who are watching this, if you are interested in coming on the show at any time, just send me a little message on Discord or over on Instagram or on wherever it is that you follow me. Just send me a little DM and we'll set up something and we'll make it happen, because we want to make this more of a community based thing where we're all learning from each other. No doubt we're all going to learn a lot from Comrade Lucha this evening. And yeah, so if you're interested in coming on, just let me know. Just drop us a message if you've anything to say. Anything, if you just want to shoot shit and talk shite, then we can do that. We can have the crack. That's not a bother. But if you have something more important and prescient and related to revolutionary struggle that you feel you want to discuss or you want to highlight, whether that's organizational work, theoretical work, educational stuff, whatever it might be, just let me know. And I'm trying to open up the platforms to everybody, and as long as we're at least somewhat on the same page politically, you're more than welcome to come on and to have a chat at any stage. Yeah. So we're gonna have a lot of fun tonight. Or this afternoon, I suppose, for Comrade Lucha. We're gonna be talking about MLM. We're gonna be talking about Cuban solidarity. We're gonna be talking about revolutionary arts. Get your questions into the chat as well. We'll take questions. We'll answer questions as we go. And I think we're going to have a pretty interesting conversation. Maybe we'll start off by talking a little bit about MLM and Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, and then we'll progress into a discussion about Cuba, because I think that this is always a very interesting conversation to have from the Marxist-Leninist, Maoist perspective. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. I don't want to give too much spoilers, but there's a popular narrative that we hear about Cuba, which is like the liberal narrative that it's terrible. Then you've got the ML narrative about it being like heaven on earth, and then you've got the MLM narrative, which, well, it's there's a much wider spectrum of opinion and disagreements within the MLM camp, I think, with regard to Cuba. Even if we're all, of course, in agreement with regard to support for the national liberation struggle, for their national sovereignty and their fight against imperialism. But it'll be an interesting one to tease out and to discuss as we go out. So, Lucha, if you wouldn't mind, let's dial it back a little bit and talk a little bit about MLM. How did you come to find yourself in the position of being this Marxist-Leninist, Maoist, revolutionary artist? How did you find yourself moving towards becoming a student of MLM?
Yeah, so it I do I am Cuban, so I do have sort of a background with this sort of a revolutionary background. I guess I was kind of brought up with a little bit of knowledge of the Cuban Revolution. Lots of, well, I don't want to say lots of, but there are some Cuban Americans who come from families who were quote unquote disenfranchised by the Cuban Revolution, right? There's a certain word that we use for those people, but I don't want to say it on stream. But
We all know the word.
I think, yeah, I think we all know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so there are some people like that, but there are also some people like my family who did benefit greatly from the Cuban Revolution itself. So we do have sort of that sort of revolutionary lineage, I guess, going on. My my dad was Cuban. He was born in Camagüey in Cuba, and he came here to America during the special period in the 1990s, which was a time when the Soviet Union had just collapsed, and so because of that, Cuba lost its biggest source of foreign aid. So it was very times were very tough. So he came here to work a little bit, and then he was going to go back. But unfortunately, with the immigration laws in this country, it was very difficult for him to make his way back there. So he didn't really get that opportunity. So then later on, I was born here. my father did pass away when I was younger, but before that, we did sort of get uh, a lot of time to sort of bring me up with that kind of revolutionary mindset of the benefits that the Cuban Revolution did bring to the average Cuban, right?
Mm.
The poorer Cubans under the dictatorship of Batista before. Um, so I do have sort of a background in this, but so for the longest time, because of that, I did kind of consider myself a student of Marxism Leninism because I was very much infatuated with the uh, the Cuban Revolution and still
Mm.
am.
Understandably,
But
yeah.
yeah, it really, when you grow up sort of in that background, it really develops your outlook on the world. Um, but anyway, yeah. So that's what happened. But then, sort of, when I started to actually read for myself and read more about uh, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, sort of get into that theory, I sort of started to develop my position on what the Cuban Revolution was. And just to kind of clear up any misconceptions, it was, of course, a progressive national democratic revolution,
Mm.
but it wasn't necessarily a socialist revolution.
Mm.
Um, there's a lot of people do have a lot of misconceptions about my views on Fidel Castro. He was I believe he did very good things for the Cuban people, but I do not believe he was a socialist. I believe at the end of the day, um, I uphold and defend his actions during the Democratic Revolution to sort of eliminate the vestiges of feudalism in Cuba because that was an objectively positive force, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
Uh, but after that, he did, of course, fall to this current of opportunism by allying himself with what had developed into a form of Soviet social imperialism at the time. Uh, he sort of made Cuba very dependent on Soviet aid for the bulk of their economy. Um, they kind of missed the under Castro. Cuba kind of missed the chance to sufficiently develop agriculture because of this dependence on Soviet foreign aid. Uh, there's also things we can say about the interesting ways he felt about Chairman Mao. But
Oh yeah.
so yeah, yeah,
Or the relate or the what was it, the 3 days mourning of after Franco's death. That was
oh yeah, of
that was
course.
an
We
interesting decision. A
The
week
thing
was
is, we
it?
can't.
Jesus.
I think it was, yeah. We can't shy away from these things, though, right? We have to, no matter how we feel about the person, we have to confront these. And yeah, that was definitely a really, really bad move. The weird infatuation with Franco, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he even called Mao a fascist at one point.
Oof.
But yeah, anyway, the point is, yeah, I do. It does at first sort of seem like a contradiction, like what you're Cuban, but you don't think Cuba is socialist.
Mm.
But it really, when you look at the objective facts, that becomes the only conclusion you could come to, right? Um, I'm sort of getting off topic here about how this relates to Marxism, Leninism, Maoism,
No, it's
so I'll
great.
sort of.
It's really useful, and we can circle back around. I mean, the two questions are very much interlinked, so we can definitely we can circle back to a lot of these points as well. We can return to various aspects of the Cuban Revolution and the National Democratic um, aspect, the National Liberation Movement, the in terms of socialist transition and where there are some certain issues and disagreements and so on and so forth. But no, you don't need to worry about getting off track. This is what this entire stream is about. Getting off track and taking it into the wilderness,
Yeah. Sure. Um, but yeah, so it's kind of like, yeah, so I did have sort of an interesting dynamic with my initial uh, sort of uh, introduction to socialism, I guess. And I know we talked about the Philippines already, but it was sort of that movement, learning about that movement, that sort of led me to getting into studying Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, as
Mm.
opposed to just stopping at Marxism, Leninism, right? Um, because I was doing a lot of research on the ongoing Filipino Revolution and seeing the position that these comrades held, um, and I realized that they had uh, some specific criticisms of the People's Republic of China.
Mm.
And at that time, I was very much of the opinion that China was the sort of world beacon of socialism, right? You know, like the world's
Mm.
largest, most powerful, genuinely socialist country, right? Um, but when I started to kind of read more about their positions on that topic, uh, that led me to researching more about Chinese revisionism and the history of how the legacy of Chairman Mao was all but abandoned by the Dong clique when they came to power, and I started reading more about Chinese social imperialism writings by the amazing Communist Party of India Maoist. They have a
Mm.
lot of amazing writings on evaluating how China stands in the world right now. And it was very interesting to sort of develop those positions. And I came to the conclusion that I cannot really be a supporter of the Filipino Revolution and still believe that China is a socialist country, because these are uh, two entities that are in contradiction with each other, right? Like you
Mm.
have Chinese imperialist encroachment the in the Philippines themselves, right? You have there's a lot of conflict going on in that area. So I
Yeah.
did have to pick a side, and my the conclusions from my study ultimately brought me to wanting to learn more about Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, learning more about the anti revisionist struggle that's currently going on, um, and eventually I sort of got into where it all started, the revolution in Peru, the
Mm.
People's War there. And I started reading more about Gonzalo, and I really appreciated his ideas and the PCP synthesis of MLM.
Mm.
And it was just a very interesting journey from sort of this vague, Marxist Leninist position to uh, really getting into like the scientific study of Marxism, and eventually, you know, uh, aligning myself with the highest stage, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism.
Yeah, it's very interesting, a very interesting process of refining as time goes on that you've spoken about there. And actually, I think that the Philippines may have been a similar point from my own development in terms of understanding modern Chinese social imperialism. And as you said, there is a presence of Chinese. So now, I don't want to overstate this. We don't overstate this. The main, obviously the main imperialist power in the world is the U.S. And even in the Philippines, the U.S. is of course the main imperialist aggressor. But
Yes, of course. I'd say that.
like significant, like
Sorry, go ahead.
hundreds of times worse. Far, far, far worse. But at the same time, there is still Chinese imperialism creeping into the Philippines, particularly in what's called, the so-called South China Sea, that whole area, and all of the resources below that. In terms of forestry, deforesting, in places where the NPA would basically be, engaged in people's war and stuff like that.
Right.
So there actually are, you can actually see like China is like exporting capital into the Philippines and extracting and exploiting all of this stuff. And so it is, to me, it seems to be, if you want to take a position of saying, well, I support modern China and I support the Filipino Revolution. To me, that's flattening contradiction. That's kind of the revisionist two into one, rather than one divides into two. You're saying, two combines into one and everything's okay. Which I know some organizations do take that position of supporting both modern China and the Filipino struggle. But to me, these seem to be opposing forces. It seems to be quite difficult to have an ideologically consistent position of supporting both of them at the same time. So it's very interesting how that forced you to move towards the higher stage again, which is Marxism, Leninism, Maoism today. And I would have had a very similar trajectory. So I think that's very, very interesting. Yeah, and again as well, I had
Right.
that same kind of buffer period of checking out what's going on in the Philippines, in India, these actual revolutionary people's wars that are very visible. Like you'll actually see the media, you can actually see the revolutionaries, marching through the forest and just engaging in these genuine revolutionary acts. Whereas it seems in many cases like many Marxist-Leninist organizations have almost become kind of book clubs, especially in the Western world anyway, like here in Ireland or probably in what's called the United States. There's often a tendency for Marxist Leninist organizations to just be essentially book clubs that don't really do anything and talk about this hypothetical future revolution which never seems to be coming, or it's not actually going anywhere. It's like when is this magical mythical revolution actually going to happen? Like when and how are we going to get there, and how are we actually sincerely going to put a dictatorship, the proletariat, in place? How are we actually going to smash the bourgeois state and bring about step into the socialist transition period? How are we actually going to do that? And it seems like the Marxist Leninist Maoists have a lot of answers to that question, whereas the Marxist Leninists are kind of
Right.
they're kind of flip flopping between like electoralism, or maybe more like, for example, the Communist Party of Ireland takes a very syndicalist kind of approach where it's all through the trade unions, very much what Lenin would have called economism, and
Mm.
it's not actually given a clear pathway to get there. Here's how we're actually going to do revolution, which is a strange thing, particularly in the Irish context, because with the Republican movement, we've got a very, very much a revolutionary tradition here that has a very clear pathway forward. Famously, the British state said that there was no way to defeat the Irish Republican movement militarily. They famously said that about the Provost, the provisional IRA, um, towards the end. I believe it was towards the end of the 1980s. And so there's a very clear strategy there in Ireland, here in Ireland, and so it's quite strange when people are like, okay, well maybe we'll fuck around and try the ballot box for a little while, or maybe we'll just try to unionize some people, or here we'll do this, we'll do that. No, as you said, it's moving to Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. It's putting all this stuff together. It's codifying it. It's saying we know actually how to seize power. We know how to do revolution. Here's the steps that you need to take. Here's what you need to do. Here's your three weapons of the revolution. Here's how you're going to organize everything. Here's how you connect with the masses through your mass organizations, your United Front. Here's how you empower the people. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much about the People's Army, but yeah. And then, of course, the Communist Party is
Right.
in above that. So it actually gives you a very clear step by step guide for here's how we're going to institute socialism. Here's how we're going to bring about socialist revolution for the people, which just doesn't seem to be there in a lot of cases with the very kind of eclectic, wishy-washy Marxism Leninism that I used to fuck with big time. So yeah, it's a breath of fresh air, I think, to have that clarity that Marxism Leninism Maoism, particularly the red line, I would argue brings with it. But as you said,
Right. Well, and
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's interesting with you specifically because you have a relatively long history of making your position on these things known through uh, your videos, your video essays that
Mm,
you make with your educational videos and stuff like that. Um, so it is interesting to see your kind of evolution specifically with regards to China and how China, the modern Chinese state, sort of fits into the world uh, imperialist, conflicts today. Um,
mm,
and I do want to say also that there is a very interesting dynamic there with regards to Ireland because, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush here for all Irish people, but it it is interesting to see how you are right. Irish people, I feel, in Ireland generally are sort of brought up with this sort of this revolutionary tradition,
mm,
because Ireland has a long history of revolution, right?
yeah.
And not only that, but revolutionary solidarity with other revolutionary states. And I think that Cubans are the same way. At least Cubans living in Cuba,
Mm,
we're both kind of brought up with that revolutionary tradition because with Cubans it was first rebelling against Spain and second against the imperialism of the United States, and with Ireland it's been basically Britain the whole time. But yeah,
yeah.
there's there is a very interesting dynamic there.
Yeah, definitely. And of course there is. I mean, like you go to everywhere, especially in the occupied six counties, you see Cuba flags everywhere, like you see like the graffiti and everything, you see Che everywhere, and there's that old
Mm.
the saying, the slogan or whatever that Che's dad said, that in my son's blood flowed the in my son's veins flowed the blood of Irish rebels. And that's everywhere, and
I
everybody has the little Che's everywhere. It's class. I mean,
Patrick
everybody.
Lynch was his name,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
the
Everybody.
most Irish name.
Yeah, you look at Che Guevara and you just, I don't know, you wouldn't think it. You wouldn't think it anyway. But yeah, he definitely had that revolutionary spirit, and there's definitely a connection there, and definitely Irish people seeking national liberation and socialist revolution would certainly look to Cuba as a really inspiring example of that, and of that fight against imperialism in the world. So, and I want to talk about this particular aspect when it comes to Cuban solidarity, because I think that when we approach the particular question of Cuba as Marxist Leninist Maoists, um, we have a tendency as Marxist Leninist Maoists to want to have the to be correct. We don't want to be seen as the revisionists. We don't want to be seen as this or that, and we have to take very hardline positions because we understand the real threat that revisionism poses. We understand that U.S. imperialism, that Nazi fascism, none of these things could actually defeat socialism. It was only revisionism that could defeat socialism. The revisionist um, capitalist roaders and the counter revolutions that occurred under Deng Xiaoping, Khrushchev, so on and so forth. They were the ones that defeated socialism. That caused the fall of socialism. And so
Right.
we take this very seriously, and with good reason, I believe. It is very important that we do maintain a firm anti-revisionist position. And so when it comes to talking about Cuba, we often jump right to the criticism. We jump to, what is it, burn down the cane fields. We jump to
Right.
evaporation.
It's a Soviet sugar colony, stuff like
Exact.
that.
Yeah, all of this stuff, and Cuba, the evaporation of a myth. We jump to these very, very, and it can be, and we can sometimes go to the ultra left positions. And the issue is. This is very attractive, particularly for baby Maoists who want to kind of show off that we've got like the most left position and we're super revolutionary and yada yada yada. And okay, great. What's the principal contradiction in the world? The principal contradiction in the world is imperialism and the oppressed nations. That is the principal
I
contradiction.
agree.
The principal contradiction, of course, there are other big contradictions between the imperialist powers and so on and so forth. But Cuba is not an imperialist power. Cuba is an oppressed nation. So we always need
Hmm.
to look at this first and foremost and say, do we support them on that basis? And yes, absolutely, we absolutely stand in 100% solidarity with the people of Cuba, with the entire people of Cuba, against US imperialism and the horrific genocidal blockade that's been placed on it, and that has made the building of socialism extremely difficult, and even if we have these criticisms of, okay, the sugar, okay, and being made dependent on the Soviet Union and Soviet social imperialism, okay, but we also need to look at the external factors there. We also need to look at this blockade and how, and it's not even just the US blockade, it's the fact that there's the US blockade that puts up barriers for other countries to actually trade with Cuba. Because if you trade with Cuba, then you're not allowed to trade with the US if it's like 10%, even 10% of the products have been made in the US. And so there's all these sorts of aspects that are really important to consider. And I think that by jumping straight to the criticisms of maybe what we would see as not sufficiently building socialism or not sufficiently advancing through a socialist transition, we're kind of, to me anyway, in my opinion, I think that we are actually neglecting the principal contradiction, which is supporting the suppressed nation against the most horrific imperialism that has ever been known to the world. I mean, it's not, I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is a genocidal embargo. This is horrific. We need to stand with the
It
people
is.
of Cuba, 100%. There can be no if, buts, or maybes about that. And I think we really need to foreground that first and foremost,
Not only to stand with the people themselves, which is very important, but also to stand against these blatant, barefaced uh, attempts to destabilize Cuba itself, Cuban society, with these blatant coup attempts that
Yeah.
happen every few years.
Mm,
That are under the guise of so-called popular movement, right?
mm,
It really does need to be said that although we can and should have our criticisms of the Cuban state. We do definitely need to place above all else solidarity with the Cuban people against the monster that is American imperialism.
Mm, yeah,
And the same goes for the DPRK too. I have
agreed.
lots
Yeah.
of criticisms of the DPRK. Right, I don't believe it's a socialist country. Nevertheless, does that mean that we should support these fucking genocidal sanctions that are being placed on the DPRK?
Fuck
No,
no.
of course not. The same goes for Palestine too. We don't
Yeah.
believe that Palestine is a socialist country, obviously, but we support first and foremost the right of the Palestinian people to national self-determination through any means necessary to
Mm.
resist Zionist oppressors. Right. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
so that we definitely do need to make our position known on this. That while we are anti-revisionist, first and foremost, we do stand against the principal contradiction in the world today, which is the contradiction between, as you said, the contradiction between imperialism and the oppressed countries that imperialism targets.
Mm.
And you said something that I completely agree with earlier, um, about revisionism being the main culprit for having killed the socialist movements in the 20th century. I completely agree with that. Mao said that imperialism is a paper tiger, and if that is the case, then, and it is, I would say that revisionism is the actual tiger, right? We
It's a really cool way of phrasing it. Yeah, I love that.
Right. Mao said that
Final boss.
wherever, Mao said that wherever revisionism goes, or what was it? Well, wherever revisionism goes, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie follows, or something like that. And that is absolutely, completely true. We can see from history that is 100% true.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, we do need to kind of, uh, and a big part about any type of Marxist study is being able to find this way to connect to the masses without tailing the masses, right?
Mm.
Um, we need to be able to integrate ourselves with the masses, and it's very difficult to do that if you're constantly sort of taking these positions that can at first glance make it seem like you don't support the struggle of these oppressed peoples because they're not socialist, which
Yeah,
is of course not our position. um,
agreed.
Communists don't try to conceal their aims and goals. Of course not. But at the same time, we do need to take into account how these positions are coming off to um, other people. We can't just say, whatever, fuck Cuba because they're revisionist. Uh, like, it is true that they're revisionist. However, we definitely do need to make our support for the Cuban people known, or support against uh, imperialism, and not just Cuba,
Mm.
obviously, Ireland, Palestine, all these places that are the the most severe, I guess you could say, victims of imperialism currently.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, of course, the Palestinian struggle, and I think that that's a really, really good example of the support on the basis of national oppression that we really need to frame this whole conversation in. And this is it. I mean, nobody for a second would say, oh, fuck the PFLP or something like that, or the PLO or something like that. They're not, Marxist Maoists. They're not revolutionary enough or whatever. Nobody would ever say that. That'd be ridiculous. Of course, we absolutely stand with their revolutionary struggle. They've done, and that needs to be the principal position that we take. And I think that we need to start our conversation with Cuba from that perspective as well. Now, I will say, look, if people do want to have the criticisms of the development of socialism or the lack thereof, if you want to take that position, then do have a read of Cuba, The Evaporation of a Myth. Have a read of Burn Down the Cane Fields. Engage with that material.
Hmm.
It's important material to engage with, but when we take that for granted, when we understand that yes, there are these criticisms of socialism there, I think we can go beyond that and we can start to look at, like, well, what's positive? You mentioned there were so many good things that happened as a result of the Cuban Revolution for your family that you've experienced? I don't want to get too like fucking Michael Parenti on it, like, oh, the revolution that feeds the children is the revolution that gets my support. Because
Right.
I mean, it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's poetry when he's saying that stuff. But at the same time, you could find yourself supporting all kinds of stuff just based on feeding people or whatever. Let's talk about some of the things that we actually do like about Cuba and that actually are really inspiring and amazing, and that cause all kinds of even principled anti-revisionist groups. Like, for example, Anti-Imperialist Action Ireland does have at least engages in and has held all kinds of solidarity campaigns in Ireland against the blockade, the genocidal blockades, outside of like the US embassy and that. And you can go onto their Twitter and you can find all kinds of pictures of these kinds of events that have been held. And I think that most principled comrades in the world do take that position of supporting, of starting from a position of support, even if there are other criticisms that come a little bit later. So what are some of the things that you noticed really improved for your family and that you've heard about, and things that you appreciate and enjoy that we can all learn from in terms of moving forward, socially, societally, I don't know. Hopefully you understood the question I'm
Uh,
asking.
yeah, no, I did. I think the thing about Cuba specifically that sort of everyone's mind kind of goes to first, if you're educated with this sort of thing, is their absolutely amazing medical care
Mm,
sort of area. I'm not sure what to call it, but that sort of industry, I guess would be the right word. But they have
sector, yeah, I don't know.
absolutely, yeah, they've made absolutely amazing advancements with their medical stuff. It they have amazing medical international solidarity too.
Yeah,
Um,
exporting
the
doctors.
Cuba sends right, Cuba sends doctors all over the world because they are some of the best in the world. Cuba has developed a lung cancer vaccine that is impossible to, or almost impossible to get in the United States without smuggling it in illegally, precisely because of this imperialist blockade. I mean,
Mm,
these are things that you can develop when you. It's very inspiring to see these amazing advancements being developed in spite of an imperialist blockade being
mm.
imposed upon them for over 60 years. Cuba has handled the current. I, I don't know how these live streams work exactly. I don't know what I can say specifically
It'll
to.
certainly be demonetized, or at least
Right.
limited in terms of ads. Even just by, I think, by the fact that we've mentioned the PFLP earlier, that's probably going to straight away have this
Right.
demonetized. So I mean, fire away. Just say whatever you want. Just don't say anything
Well,
that
I
don't
was
say anything that you wouldn't want repeated back to you in a military barracks. Is what I would say. Don't say anything that's going to get you into
right, of
trouble.
course. Um, Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that Cuba, well, it's not a matter of whether I think it or not. It's true that Cuba has absolutely handled the current COVID pandemic with absolute grace and aplomb, especially compared
Agreed.
to places like the United States, where you have, I think we just recently surpassed 1 million cases, right? Um, but this is precisely because of their amazing advancements in medical technology that they've made, which, like I said before, is even more impressive if you look at the fact that they have been under this embargo for 60 plus years, right?
Mm,
So I think that's one of the things that everybody's mind jumps to when they think of Cuba is their amazing medical care, um, their admirable medical internationalism, their international solidarity with regards to sending out these amazing dedicated doctors that actually go to the people and help them. Um,
mm.
yeah, so that's one thing I really admire about Cuba. Um, Another thing is they do have um, a very great housing industry. They have
Yeah.
homes for everybody, right?
Mm.
And again, I do
Top
want to
10.
reiterate
Well,
that.
I just on that, and before you, I don't mean to cut you off, sorry, but I believe they have top 10 home ownership in the world, which is just that's mental.
Yeah,
And someone's like, wait, hang on, if you think about places where private property or at least personal property would be highest, you wouldn't immediately think of Cuba, but that was something that was
right.
really prioritized. Now, I didn't mean to cut you off there. You were going to say,
No, no, you're fine. Yeah, I completely agree. It is very, very interesting. It's inspiring that. they have done all this, even though they are like a what can be considered, I guess, a third world, quote unquote country, even though I don't really like that term that much.
Mm.
But yeah, totally, it's very inspiring to see this. Um, and Cuba, it is a poor country generally, for reasons. Even for reasons other than the blockade, although that is the principal reason why they do
Mm.
have poverty in Cuba. There are other reasons too. Um, but that being said, the fact that they have dealt with all this, yet they are still able to provide a home for almost everyone, almost eradicate homelessness, raise the literacy rate to staggering degrees. These are all very good things that we should support.
Mm.
Now, that being said, we can and should support these things, but we should also speak frankly about these things. These things were done within the context of a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Now, that does not completely throw out all the achievements of Cuba, um, but we do, like I said, we do need to put these things into context. We can't become enamored with the solely with the achievements that they have made. We cannot forget the class struggle, because the class struggle is always principle. And
Mm.
if a country abandons class struggle, like what happened in Cuba, we do need to come to terms with that, and we do need to criticize that and uh, support the Cuban people in rectifying that error. Um, but of course, that being said, again, these are all amazing things that the Cuban people have done, have achieved for themselves. Um, it is very admirable to see, and I think that
Mm.
goes, that really shows the determination of the Cuban people in general, that they were able to achieve all this, even in spite of all that they've been through over the past 60 years.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree. And I suppose there is a tendency to go a little bit softer on Cuba. I think because of those horrific conditions. I mean, look, no, it's nowhere else in the world is subject to the horrific genocidal quote embargo, but really blockades that Cuba is, and to be
Right.
to be, I suppose, excelling in those conditions is remarkable. Even if it is, as we say, like under a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. I think that even if we're going to take this extremely critical line, we'd have to admit that it's one of the best social democracies on the planet. You know? I think we'd have to,
Right.
even if we are just saying, well, it is ultimately the bourgeoisie are ultimately in power. It's pretty fucking good by that standard, by
Yeah.
that metric, rather than
Right.
saying like, is it a dictatorship of the proletariat? If we put aside that question, we could say like, well, there have been incredible achievements and incredible advances, and I think it's worth taking a moment to discuss Cuban democracy, which is something that is
Hmm.
often. It's often totally distorted because, of course, in liberal media, you'll hear that it's just a it's a quote dictatorship, and that's the end of it, and it's just Castro's in charge,
Right.
and that's kind of the end of it. And people never actually understand the real serious, and I would say probably the deeper democracy that they have in Cuba than probably anywhere else in the so-called quote democratic world. In fact, just the level of participation that they have is it's staggering. From the municipal assemblies to the national assemblies, the
Hmm.
mass organizations, all the broad fronts that they have. I mean, people are involved just at the community level and community policing, and not community policing as such, but looking after communities and noticing what's going right, what's going wrong in the communities, and solving all their problems together. I believe it's called the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, the CDR, women's committees, all that sort of stuff. There's great stuff there in terms of women's liberation and women's emancipation. I believe that women constitute about 49% of the legislative assembly in Cuba, which is massive.
And
Uh,
Afro Cubans as well constitute
Afro
a very
Cubans,
large part of it
yeah.
too.
So these are objectively very progressive if you look at where Cuba had been before that. If you look at Cuba under Batista,
Mm.
and then you look at where Cuba is today, I mean, that's massive. It's unbelievable, like the achievements that they've made, and I think people are right to be inspired by that. We can go very hard on the socialist aspect and say, well, they didn't quite, progress through the socialist transition. But I think we're missing so much when we jump directly to that level. I think we're missing out on a lot. And even as you said, like with regard to like healthcare and stuff like that, housing. Food, Jesus fucking Christ, something like just even something as simple as food, actually feeding people, giving people their food, free food, of course, in the hospitals, free food in the workplace. I think now it's more like subsidized. I think they've moved more towards a subsidized model. But I mean, as communists, I suppose we are, to take the left composition to talk about the abolition of the commodity form and stuff like that. We are interested in taking things out of the circuit of exchange value and focusing on the use value. And that's exactly what happened with their medical system, with regard to many aspects of their food system, housing, and so on and so forth. Now, I know there's certain criticisms with regard to housing because I believe it was maybe in the last 15 years or so. Geez, I'm losing track of time as I get older. But certainly in the last 20 years, anyway, they have changed some of the laws around housing. Now, I know there were specific
Hmm.
reasons for that, but I believe that individuals can now
Like there's been
sell.
privatization and such.
Privatization,
Yeah.
yeah, that's it exactly. Now, so I know that there's been kind of maybe some steps backward in that regard, and a lot of people are very critical of any steps backwards that Cuba does make, towards the complete capitalist restoration. And yeah, there's fair criticisms there, but of course there is still the genocidal embargo that you always need to keep into
Oh,
account.
right. And
Do
the
you know
thing
what I
is,
mean?
there is a distinction. Yeah, there is a distinction that needs to be made. I see this all the time. I see people, I see apologists for American imperialism say things like, well, yes, there is an embargo, but it doesn't restrict the importing of food or medical supplies. And it's like, okay, but guess what? Guess what? They can import food, a certain amount of food and medical supplies. Uh, but guess what? They can't import. They can't import things like tractors or
Mm,
copper wiring for use in machinery. They can't import very valuable stuff like cobalt for use in developing electronics and stuff like that.
mm,
So all these things do have a cumulative effect of um, it, like you said earlier, it leads up to what is essentially amounts to a genocidal embargo, genocidal sanctions on this developing country.
mm,
Um, so you're right. There are criticisms. There are the houses in Cuba. Some of them aren't built that well because they're several years old. But we do need to make a distinction between what is the fault of Cuba itself and what is the fault of the embargoes and the sanctions that are being placed on them that they are constantly living under. And I
mm,
think it's a testament to their dedication to self determination and bettering their lives. That despite all this, I know I've said this about 20 times already, but despite these embargoes, despite these sanctions, they still persist in building this society with these amazing innovations in
mm,
healthcare and housing and just moving towards social equality. All these things.
mm.
Um,
Environmentalism as well.
it,
That's
it
another
definitely
aspect.
right.
Really
Yeah, of course. They
incredible, like one of the
the
greenest countries in the
reforestation
world.
efforts.
Yes, amazing stuff in that regard. Really, really impressive.
Hmm.
You know. So there's a lot to love there, and it's also important to keep in mind as well that like the embargo is actually intensifying as well, particularly under like Trump, and of course, Biden
It
has
is.
apparently
It went
no
through a little
interest.
bit of a thaw under Obama,
That's
but
right, yeah.
quickly afterwards, it fell back into the militaristic place that it was in before, and it's I would assume that it's getting to the level it was before under Joe Biden.
Mm. Yeah, it's and like the remittances, the whole thing about remittances being cut off and not being able to send money back, which was a major source of livelihood and well-being for so many people
Right.
in Cuba. So I mean, they're just strangling Cuba. Do you know what I mean? Just year by year, just they've been doing this for over 60
Right.
years. Cuba, they've been fighting back, and so I mean, Jesus, you have to admire that. If nothing else, you
Hmm.
absolutely have to admire that. It's an incredible resolve. There have been countries that have been subjected to far less in terms of embargoes and in terms of sanctions that have crumbled, you know, and
Right.
it's an inspiration, and especially as well, I say this as an Irish person as well, because I'm very conscious that when the Socialist Republic of Ireland, when we have the 32 county All Ireland Republic, we're going to be under probably a very similar situation, as a small island next to this great imperialist power, who's going to be bullying us, and who's going to be basically cordoning us off from Europe and our other trade partners and so on. Like, I'm very conscious that Cuba is going to be a model that many of us are going to look to and are going to learn from, and hopefully we can build
Right.
solidarity between these oppressed nations fighting imperialism.
You can't see it, but in my head, I just imagined a, a handshake between a hand with a Cuban flag and a hand with an Irish flag.
I need to
So
see that. I need to see that artwork. I need to
right,
see.
I got you.
If only there was someone here who could make that into a reality.
Yeah, if only.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh.
thanks for yeah. You asked about art a while ago, and I just completely, just totally forgot about that question.
Oh
So
no, no, no,
my
no! It's
my
good.
bad about that.
You
But
make no, no, no. Come on. The art's being on display for the whole stream here. The art's
right.
here for everyone to enjoy as it is. So, uh,
I
but
do
yeah.
want to give a huge shout out of inspiration to Young Black Maoist on
Ah,
Instagram and Twitter.
champion.
This individual makes absolutely just, I don't even have any words. It's absolutely amazing agitprop stuff that my stuff pales in comparison to. It's very very professional. It's very high quality. They are an amazing artist. And they serve as a big source of inspiration for my work. Along with that, other inspirations, there's Comrade Kevin Rashid Johnson, who
Mm.
is he's a member of the Revolutionary Intercommunal Black Panther Party. He's currently incarcerated in Ohio, I believe. But he's a really dedicated revolutionary and an amazing artist. You can see his art at, I think it's rashidmod.org.
Mm.
He's been making amazing art and amazing propaganda for several years. And a lot of my more recent pieces, where it's like the individuals on the white background, and it sort of looks like a comic strip, I guess.
Mm.
Those pieces were very heavily inspired by the work that Comrade Rashid has done. So yeah, he's a very big source of inspiration. Young Black Maoist is as well. So yeah, free Rashid,
Hell yeah! All power to the people. I love that guy so
of
much.
course.
And Young Black Male was an amazing revolutionary artist as well. Yeah, amazing, amazing work. And don't put yourself down. Don't belittle your own work, because it's amazing, and it's really really helpful. So how dare you? How dare you insult the great work that you've been producing?
I apologize.
Self credit. All right, fantastic, fantastic stuff. Community, I'm just gonna take a little look into the comments box here. I'm not sure if there are any questions. I think there was a question that was asked of you by one of the comments earlier on, Anush Ghosh. We'll wind down the conversation, but I just want to give you this question, and I'll take a little look at the questions in the chat, and then we can maybe discuss those for another, maybe about 10-15 minutes, if that's okay with you. The question that was asked in the chat, and I'll send it to you on Discord so you can see the full thing. It's from Anush Gooch, who says, Lucha, what are some of your favorite Instagram accounts that you'd recommend others to follow? Now, I assume Young Black Maoist is one of them. I'm not sure if you have other suggestions.
Yeah, of course, Young Black Maoist. There's this one group called the Revolutionary Pan African Maoist Committee.
Mm.
Their Instagram thing is Rev Pan Af MC. They're a group that is geared towards New African Maoists, and they're a Marxist-Leninist Maoist group. They're not like a vanguard party, but they are still a very interesting group to check out, especially if you are a New African with Maoist sympathies, or if you are a Maoist already. Another good one is uh, Rad Reads, Brent from Rad Reads. I think you
Love.
talked to them in a video before. Yeah, they have amazing videos about Marxist literature. Um, it's not, they're not just on Instagram, they're also on YouTube too. Uh, but yeah, they do great work with spreading Marxist literature and reviewing them. And so if you want to get into reading theory, you should definitely check them out. Um,
I
yeah,
second that.
there's a lot of, sorry.
I second that recommendation wholeheartedly.
Oh yeah, they're great. Um, there's also Black Liberationist, who is she is
It's great, yeah.
uh, a British, um, well, I don't know if she would call herself British, but she lives in Britain. She is
Greater
also
Ireland.
a revolution, right? Greater Ireland, yeah. Um, Greater Gaul. Yeah, she's a great revolutionary artist as well. Lots of great revolutionary artists on social media that are very, very underappreciated, that you should definitely check out. Um, I'll probably post like a story or something on Instagram shouting them out in a minute.
Good
But
idea.
yeah, you should definitely check them out. They're very good. Oh, I have been working. I actually do have a like a collab
Oh,
coming up with yeah, with the Irish Republican Society on Instagram.
very cool.
Um,
They make great work.
yeah, they make great art. They're interesting because they're able to with their art they're able to like express linking the Irish struggle with other struggles all over the world, which I really appreciate, and it's something that
Mhm.
I've kind of tried to emulate in my art recently too. So definitely shout out to all those folks. Love to them. Uh, yeah, they're all great.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for those recommendations. They're great, and I can definitely wholeheartedly stand behind all of those recommendations. They're really, really important, and I
I
look
see
forward to.
a
Mm,
question. I see a question in the chat that I get a lot from from people who kind of want to get into revolutionary art or making agitprop. They ask what program I use.
mm.
I use an app. I have an iPad with a an Apple Pencil, and the app I use for that is Procreate. Um, it's I believe it's $9.99 on the App Store, which seems like a lot, but I've used this app for several years, and it's worth every cent in my opinion. Especially if you're like me and you don't really have access to like a good computer with like Photoshop and stuff, and
Mm,
you're not fluent in Photoshop.
mm.
This app is amazing. It's very good. So yeah,
Cool. So Procreate on iPad.
right,
First, I need to get an iPad though before I can start making that work.
right.
But to anyone else who has one, hell yeah, get digging into that. Brilliant. Thank you very much. There are a couple of other questions here. One which has just come in quite recently from Toon Trooper, which might be interesting. They say, "I have a question. Are you a part of the Cuban American community? And if so, do you have any recommendations for organizing in this group?" I'm not sure if you want to speak on that. Uh, as always, just be careful with what's said, OPSEC wise. Uh, and I just say for anyone who's asking kind of questions like this, just be cautious and be careful in terms of protecting people's identities. Be careful about asking whether or not people are actually involved in organizing and activism and stuff like that, because people can get into real trouble from these for being a revolutionary and basically putting a target on your back by saying you're involved in revolutionary activism. So yeah, I'm not sure how
Right.
much you want to speak to that, or if you want to give any tips or vague kind of general responses without getting too particular, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't even really consider myself a part of the American community in general, right?
Nice.
I don't necessarily consider myself, and
Make
right,
America, of
I
course.
don't necessarily, yeah, of course, all day. Um, but yeah, I do just sort of identify with like the Cuban side more, I guess. That's okay. This individual is apologizing in the chat. You don't have to apologize. It's totally fine. But regardless, there are definitely some groups. You do need to be wary of some groups specifically tailored for Cubans, especially down in Florida, because there are certain types of people in those groups.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I, I I don't know. It's kind of a difficult question because there's not really a unified, or at least not one that has publicly emerged. There's not really a Maoist a Marxist-Leninist Maoist party, right, in the United States at the moment, like there is in India or Brazil or places like that. Um, so your best bet might just be sort of making your own type of thing, not necessarily like uh, an organization, but maybe like one thing that's helped me a lot is being in various study groups to kind of deepen my understanding of the theory, so that when you are out there with the masses, you know what you're talking about. You know how to, um, how to do this shit, so to speak. Um, yeah. So that's pretty much that.
Great, thank you very much for that response. Brilliant. I think the comrade's going to get a lot out of that. There's a couple more questions. We're getting some kind of more random kind of questions about this and that. I'm just going to pop them into our little Discord chat here so you can see a few of them that have popped up there. Maybe we'll just sort of finish out in the next couple of minutes, if that's cool with you. With a few of these questions, we'll do a quick shout out at the end of it. And yeah, so I'm just going to read out a couple of questions. If any of them jump out at you that you really want to answer, that you're interested in, that sound fun to you, then by all means, we can take them afterwards. But I'm just going to read through a couple of questions that we haven't got through just yet, which is a funny question from Comrade Awesome Everton, who says, Lucha, thoughts on the future of Ireland? Which is funny.
Right.
Interesting to point at you. But so there's that question, and then there's a couple of questions about other sort of Maoist outlets in the world. I'm not sure if you wanted to give any thoughts on that particular question first, if you wanted to discuss Ireland.
Yeah, there is a specific question that I would rather avoid. It's kind of the most recent one that you sent in the Discord. That's not really public information yet, so I'd rather sort of avoid that one if that's okay. But on the future of Ireland, I think better than anyone else here, I think Paul would be better to speak on that. But my thoughts are that very optimistic about the outcome of the struggle in Ireland that is happening right now. From what I've seen, there is a resurgence going on since the end of the era that is called the Troubles, which is a very menacing name, even though it was a very revolutionary time in Irish history, at least from my research.
It was a war of national liberation.
Right.
And it hasn't ended, by the way. I do want to just highlight that.
Right, I was just about to say, which is ongoing.
Yeah, it's a red herring that it ended. It never did end. Many of the revolutionaries who were involved with that never put down their weapons, never gave up the struggle, and we're seeing a flourishing of Irish republicanism again. People are generally very sympathetic to socialist republicanism in Ireland, very, very sympathetic to it. Unfortunately, the masses often go to reformism first, and then they have to see the limits of that and the errors of that and how that doesn't actually get the people what the people need. And that's going to be the move. That's going to be the moment when we can start to make real progress. So, for example, there's an upsurge in support for Sinn Féin, the parliamentary organisation Sinn Féin, which was once a revolutionary organisation. In the 70s and the 80s, it was an incredibly revolutionary organisation, the spearhead of the Irish Revolution, and of course it fell into parliamentary cretinism, and now it's just a totally reformist organisation, and it's not going to get the people the goods, unfortunately. But I think people need to see that. I think people need to actually have them in government and see the limits of this, and actually see that they're not going to deliver national liberation and socialist revolution. They're not going to be able to. At very best, even in the best case scenario, with the Sinn Féin government through this ballot box approach, the very best case scenario is just turning Ireland into a 32 county semi-colony. So it's not actually national liberation, and it's certainly not going to deal with the problems of just continued semi-colonial exploitation. It's not going to deal with all of the problems that people are having in terms of social issues, in terms of housing, all sorts of stuff. Sinn Féin have become more and more pro-capitalist and explicitly pro-capitalist over the past couple of years in particular. They even, let's say I believe it was 2020 in the election, when they got this massive upsurge in support. They became the most popular party in Ireland electorally. they removed that year the term democratic socialism from their whole program. So they don't even talk about democratic socialism anymore. Even though, by the way, when we talk about democratic socialism, we all know we're talking about social democracy. We're talking about, center
Right.
left, whatever. We're not actually talking about when the 1970s, when they were saying that we wanted a democratic and socialist 32 county republic of Ireland. They're not talking about this anymore. They're not even talking about social democracy anymore. They're just going to become the new right wing organization. They're going to become Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael 2.0. They're following the very same trajectory which the party Fianna Fáil followed historically as well, which was once coming from this anti-imperialist tradition, the anti-treaty tradition, and then of course moving more and more into just basic centre-right politics, and just completely committed to electoralism and just becoming implementers of austerity, and that's what Sinn Féin is. Unfortunately, that's the path forward that they're going to take. But I do think that when the next election occurs in Ireland, this is going to show people the limits of parliamentarianism, and it's going to embolden people to take the step forward into revolution, into actually getting involved in revolutionary politics. People are already seeing that. People are already recognizing this. People are already pointing out the opportunism of Sinn Féin today. But there is this issue of the mass support base who, like, Sinn Féin has massive support across all sectors of society. Historically, it's been more, their support base has been rooted in the working class, and now it's much more like a middle class and very, very bourgeois character, unfortunately, of their support base. But even the people who are supporting them are generally amenable to national liberation and socialist revolution. They're actually they want these things. People are actually supportive of these kinds of things. It's just that they believe that Sinn Féin is going to deliver them, when of course we know that they're not. So yeah, I think that this when
Right.
they come into government, that's an opportunity for revolutionaries to show the limits of this, and to show that they're not actually able to deliver what they say they're going to deliver through the ballot box. That national
Yeah,
liberation can't,
definitely.
it never can come through the ballot box. So I think that opens up pathways.
Hopefully, yeah, hopefully this next election will show the Irish people that the only thing that ballot boxes are good for is using them for firewood
Hell
wood.
yeah.
So
Fucking yeah.
yeah.
Burn the ballot boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally
But
agree.
yeah, I am very optimistic about the struggle in Ireland, especially seeing the recent actions taken by the comrades over at Anti-Imperialist Action Ireland with the opening up the vacant housing for people. This was not. Do you think they campaigned for an election campaign to open up these vacant houses? No, they didn't. They did it themselves. This is concrete revolutionary action, and I think we should all support these individuals for it. And it really does give me hope that there is a revolutionary upsurge on the horizon in Ireland.
Yeah, absolutely. And even without having gone through that sort of the Sinn Féin kind of period or whatever like that, there is this massive momentum building towards revolutionary movements in Ireland again, which is amazing to see. The revolutionary movement is flourishing at the moment in Ireland. So let's see. I think personally, I think that the next couple of decades are going to be very, very exciting. A very exciting time in terms of Ireland, Irish history. But yeah, I'll have to leave it there. I don't want to get people's hopes up too much. I don't want to, and I don't want to say anything that's going to get me in trouble. So
I think we can
leave it
just
there.
say hype, and people will get it.
All aboard the hype train.
Yeah, totally.
All aboard. Leaving the station soon now, yeah. Okay, Grant. There was another question there. I'm not sure if you want to answer this one. Iskram asked, what do you think of Tien Folket Media? And I say solidarity with the Norwegian comrades. I'm an enjoyer of Tien Folket Media. I enjoy their stuff. I really appreciate that. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
you wanted to talk on that or if you had anything to say.
No, they're great. Yeah, I love them. They have really amazing articles. Specifically, they wrote this one amazing article recently. An individual contributor named, and I'm going to butcher this translation, Ragnar Rod, I think is his name. He wrote this amazing article about China's position in the new imperial, relations of the world, I guess. but it was a very good article. It's backed up by a lot of theory. It really opened my eyes. They also have a good article critiquing Juche,
Mm,
which is very interesting too. Because I was not very before I read that article. Um, I was not very well versed in criticisms that can be made of that ideology, but uh, Six Head Study Circle has a good critique of Juche as well. I think
that's right.
they're
Yeah.
on YouTube. Um, but yeah, so yeah, I really like yeah, I really like them. I really like Tinfocat. They do really good work. Um, and yeah, solidarity with them all the way.
Hell yeah. Absolutely. Totally agree. Brilliant. Let me just see if there are any other questions here in the chat. I think we can wrap up then. You'll be off the hook. I see a question. I see a question from Rasco. What do you think of the Air Renewal idea? Sinn Féin ditched it in the 80s, but it seemed good. Well, provisional Sinn Féin ditched it, of course. Republican Sinn Féin kept it up, and they do uphold it to this day, which is interesting. It's socialist, it's federalist, as opposed to being more of like a central planned economy, the kind of the Soviet style socialism that we talk about. It's more of they've got kind of a federalist idea, and I think that it's generally progressive in outlook. But of course, as scientific socialists, we would understand the need for more of a centralized socialist system. Even if we do make exceptions for alternative experimentations. So, for example, like you saw, like in Mao's China, the People's Communes, there was a lot of autonomy given to those communes at those sort of levels. So, we can be flexible with regard to experimentation, and we can try out some different things, of course, in the socialist transition periods. Um, but yeah, so I would say I would be more for a centralized starting point anyway for the economy, whereas I think that the Air Renewal program is a little bit more of a federal approach, and I think that it needs to be refined, but I do, of course, I do think that it was going in the right direction, and I think that with some criticism and some line struggle, I think it could be worked into something really progressive and really really useful. So, but yeah, there's always this line struggle like in the movements, so and it's always going to change depending on the material conditions within which we find ourselves in the actual revolutionary situation, and what can be done and what can't be done. And so yeah, but these line struggles are occurring within the movement. So yeah. Anyway, I think it was generally progressive.
Um,
But yeah, sorry, did you want to comment on that?
no, yes, sorry, it's just one little thing that I remembered
Mm.
to that I wanted to mention. Um, that it is kind of related to the Tian Fouquet question. There is there's another journal, I guess, sort of like that I want to give a shout out to. It's called Struggle Sessions, and it
Mm.
is a Marxist-Leninist Maoist theoretical journal. It's online. I think it's just strugglesessions.org. But these comrades have very amazing, very very in-depth, theoretically backed articles on many things from from like positions on how imperialism operates in the world today to criticisms of right and quote unquote left opportunism. They're very well written. They're very nuanced. And another great thing about them is that they're very open to criticism and self-criticism. They even
Mm.
have a writing campaign that they did recently called the 100 Flowers, where they allowed uh, non-contributors to submit their own articles, and even some articles that were criticizing other earlier pieces that they wrote. So these are very principled comrades, very very great analyses, and you should definitely check them out if you get the chance.
Yeah, and really important. And as you highlighted, there is that room for criticism and self-criticism, where there's disagreement, and so
Mhm.
that we can achieve principled unity together. I think that that's really really important, and it's great that they are open to that. So it's great, and there's a lot of very interesting reads over on that website. Even there may be things that you maybe disagree with. Of course, there's the big the hot question of people always talking about like proletarian feminism, and of course that was like a big issue,
Right.
that everyone wanted to talk about all the time. So if you want to hear the ins and outs of that particular question, and whether the title should be proletarian feminism or just women's emancipation within Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, that's where you want to go. That's where you want to consult, and that's where you want to start. And then of course, referring back to Tien Foucault as well, you can get the other side of that argument from Tien Foucault themselves. And so they have a very supportive argument in favor of proletarian feminism, whereas I believe the struggle sessions piece was a bit more critical of it, you know. So you can hear some different perspectives of it, and you can, through that, through reading these things and through engaging with comrades and engaging in criticism yourself, that'll help to refine your own positions on these matters, you know.
And also check out Paul's video on proletarian feminism too.
Thank
So
you.
a little self plug for you.
I feel instantly so embarrassed that I need to end the stream right there. No, listen, thanks very much,
It's
Lucha.
okay.
I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the shout out there as well at the end. That's very kind of you. I appreciate that very much. Listen, was there anything else that you wanted to shout out? Any words of solidarity? Any movements? Anything you wanted to draw attention to in the world? Whether that's other Instagram accounts, whether that's your own upcoming work that you'd like to promote, anything at all. If you have any other final closing remarks that you'd like to say before we wrap up, now's the time to do them. To the comrades in the chat who are listening along to this, let's get some 07s in the chat, and I'll give you a quick shout out just before we finally wrap up. So, Lucha, any final closing remarks before we finish this off?
Definitely unwavering solidarity with the Communist Party of Peru getting back into the struggle after reorganizing. Rest in power to Chairman Gonzalo, who recently was martyred during the struggle. Rest in power to, like I said earlier, the Filipino comrades that were martyred. Solidarity with the Communist Party of India Maoist. Solidarity with all these revolutionary groups engaging in the struggle today. And also a special note of solidarity to our Irish comrades from both Anti-Imperialist Action Ireland and other revolutionary Irish organizations who are engaging in this struggle. So yeah, hopefully soon we will see a free and united and socialist Ireland.
Hell yeah, I'll get to work. I'll do what I
Yeah,
can. I'm sure.
it rests all on your shoulders.
YouTube to the revolution. No, but in all seriousness, yeah, all power and solidarity to the comrades, Anti-Imperialist Action Ireland, and other revolutionary socialist republican organisations who are fighting for the All Ireland Socialist Republic. Thank you very much for the solidarity there. I totally agree with that. Obviously, I think KPKI is on the screen. KPKI was on the screen there a second ago, so TKP
Right.
ML as well. Important people's
Yes.
wars, shout out. So important stuff. Thanks very much for coming on. It's been a ton of fun. It's been a really interesting conversation. Diving into this conversation from a Marxist-Leninist Maoist perspective rather than like an ML perspective, I think has been quite refreshing and quite interesting. And I hope that people who've been listening to this have gotten something out of it. Thanks very much to the comrades in the chat who have been with us here, and hopefully you've enjoyed this and found it useful. Red salute to Jack Harkins, Socialist Swan, Unpredictable Axolotl. I can't really pronounce it very well. Apologies, comrade. Friend, Bug, Quinn, Raxo, So Far So Good, and Constantine Blaze, and Jessica. Cheers, folks. I hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend. I hope you have a lovely evening, afternoon, morning, night, wherever, whatever time it may be, wherever you are. And thanks again, Lucha, for coming on. I really appreciate it. Everybody, please go subscribe to Lucha's YouTube channel, follow on Instagram, on Twitter, and you'll find the links to all of those in the description box below. Cheers, folks. August Slán go fóill.